Hello, I have a new book out called Murder at the Spring Ball. It's the first in a new 1920s mystery series, and my main character is a man called Lord Edgington, who is a former police officer, and with a little bit of help from his not so competent grandson, he is going to try to solve a murder. I'm going to read you the first chapter today. So, chapter 1. Surrey, England, 1925. It must be strange to know that everyone in the room wishes you were dead. My grandfather sat very straight in the stiff, high-backed chair where he'd been resting for the last 10 years. It wasn't just our immediate family who'd come to celebrate the old man's birthday. Every last rat had scuttled out from under the skirting board. Every cousin and nephew, niece and nobody from within the ranks was there to pay their respects to Lord Edgington of Cranley Hall. The unappealing collection of playboys and charlatans, spinsters and spoilt brats sat waiting for something to happen. We sipped our tea politely, hoping that someone would break the silence. Inevitably, it was my Aunt Belinda who finally did. "Such a lovely party." She did not sound sure of herself, and my grandfather let out a huff that was only perceptible thanks to his prodigious moustache ruffling in the resultant breeze. "Yes, quite lovely," her portly brother rushed to agree. "And it's incredible to think that you're 75, father. You don't look a day over..." The sentence faded away without resolution. Presumably, my sycophantic Uncle Maitland had failed to think up an age that would sound both flattering and realistic. My great-aunt Clementine had fallen asleep in the corner and let out a single grunted snore, which made the atmosphere in the room all the more uncomfortable. Following in its wake, the only sounds were the clinking of teaspoons on porcelain and the ticking of the gigantic clock beside the door. Even grandfather's aging retriever wasn't enjoying herself and rolled onto her side, apparently ready to give up the ghost. With so many expectant heirs on hand, it was a tight squeeze in the old man's sitting room. My rakish cousin George had made sure to get a seat close to the front, and, as second in line to the Cranley family fortune, looked keen to discover why our grandfather had called everyone together for the first time in more than a decade. There were piles of cakes and sundries on offer, but they remained largely untouched. Cranley Hall's cook was well known for the eccentricity of her culinary creations, and while Lord Edgington adored them, it turned out that haddock and honey sandwiches were not to everyone's taste. Our butler Fellows cleared his throat to get his master's attention. The birthday boy continued to stare out of the window, down past the lake, and across the expansive grounds of his vast estate. Perhaps concerned that her father had finally lost his senses, my mother frowned, just as he turned to look at us with a sudden snap of the head. "I'm not planning on dying just yet." His cold grey eyes surveyed the crowd, and he spoke through resolute lips. There was no reaction at first, except for a distracted sigh from my big brother, who was still recovering from his last ill-fated romance. A few guests looked at their neighbours to confirm that they really had heard Lord Edgington's pronouncement, but then he spoke again. "I know what you're all thinking, and you're wrong." His sonorous voice boomed through the floor like a minor earthquake. He stood up without a wobble, and gasps went up around the room as if Lazarus had risen for the second time. "My days are not yet numbered, and I still have plenty of living to do." As the esteemed former police superintendent stood imposingly before us, the assembled leeches failed to smother their moans of disappointment. "Really, father?" my beak-nosed aunt interjected. "No one could possibly think..." Our host's gaze fell upon his eldest daughter. "Belinda, I've been sitting here mourning your mother for long enough. As much as you'd like me to do the honourable thing and shuffle off this mortal coil, I'm afraid I have other ideas." The notoriously impertinent butler let out a brief, caustic laugh. This elicited a curl of the lip from Uncle Maitland, a squat, middle-aged man who was forever dressed in a Norfolk jacket and hunting cap. My grandfather didn't seem to notice and continued with his speech. "I still have a lot I want to do with my life, starting with this place." He glanced around the room as though he were taking in the faded decor for the first time in years. "Cranley isn't what it used to be. It's high time I did something to bring this house back to life. Back to the way it was when my beloved Catherine was still with us." "Well, I say jolly good," my father proclaimed with a clap of his hands, and received several stern looks for his trouble. Grandfather nodded his appreciation before explaining further. "I've spent the last few months wondering if I'd ever find the strength to break free from this room, but the moment has come." He tugged his waistcoat down to straighten it, before announcing the first of his elaborate plans. "It's been 20 years since we had a real party at Cranley, and I'm going to throw one." This led to a murmur of speculation and several excited squeaks from younger members of the family. Even my brother Albert looked a little more cheerful, as a party meant the promise of new young ladies who would break his heart all over again. My mother smiled up proudly at her distinguished father, but her siblings clearly did not approve of the announcement. "Really, Daddy," Belinda began, "are you sure you've thought this through?" Lord Edgington's voice rose to become a short poke in the ribs of everyone present. "I certainly have." He nodded to his butler, who stepped forward to place an ancient magnum of champagne on the occasional table in front of his master. "Catherine and I were given this on our wedding day and spent our lives waiting for the right moment to drink it. I don't want to be like this old bottle gathering dust anymore. I want to fulfill my potential, so I've finally thought up a reason to pop the cork." My uncle was up next, with a sceptical question of his own. "But a party? Don't you think it's all a bit much at your age?" He didn't actually say these last few words, but the meaning was clear. The look which Lord Edgington directed at his son spoke volumes. "No, I do not. Cranley Hall always hosted a spring ball when I was a child, so I'm reviving the tradition. I have a clear idea in my head of how I would like it to be, and all I need is someone to make it a reality." The sedate atmosphere in the room vanished as ambitious fathers pushed their offspring forward to be the Lord's assistant, and mothers delivered stirring appraisals of their preferred candidate's suitability. The opportunity to curry favour with the wealthy old patriarch in what was surely his final years on the planet was too good to pass up. Grandfather soon silenced them. "I've already made my decision." His gaze passed over disappointed faces, searching for his chosen relative. "My grandson Christopher will be helping me." All eyes turned to the back of the room, where I was daring myself to eat one of Cook's appetizers. "Christopher?" Father asked. "Our Christopher?" Mother sought to confirm, her face mirroring her husband's for incredulity. "That's right." Lord Edgington straightened his back and looked at me with a knowing smile. "Christopher will be perfect." I froze with my mouth open, and for a moment no one made a sound. A chunk of mustard-coated turnip made a break for freedom from my sandwich, and, as it landed with a splat on the thick Chinese carpet, all hell broke loose. There you go. It's available at Amazon. I hope you'll give it a read. Thanks for listening.